Hello and welcome to this recording of the poem Imperceptibly as Grief by Emily Dickinson. Today then, as normal, we're going to go through the 3 assessment criteria for the GCSE. That is AO1, understanding what the poem is about. AO2, the effect of the language, the form and the structure of the poem. And lastly, AO3, the context. That is your knowledge of the history of when the poem was written and perhaps something about the poet themselves. As normal, I'm going to start with the context in this clip, then go on to some of the language and effects being created, and if you put the whole clip together, you'll find you have then an evaluative and sensitive approach to the poem as Imperceptible as Grief by Emily Dickinson. Emily herself was a bit of a celebrity in America at the time, and many different films have been made about her. This is the trailer for perhaps the newest one.
Check me out, I'm a man. I do what I want. I go where I want, I have the right to vote, I can legally own property.
What are they so afraid of?
Maybe they're scared that if they teach us how the world works, we'll figure out how to take over.
Oh my god, she's so insane. Of course she's insane. She's Emily Dickinson. You're gonna make a good housewife one day, Emily. Oh yeah, I'm a real catch.
You need to cut out these sort of antics.
Are you getting married?
Well, I have one purpose. And that is to become a great writer.
Because I could not stop for death. He kindly stopped for me.
Nice to see you.
And when I realized without you, our night just will not exist.
You really are my favorite person in the world. See you when I'm gone.
When you're dead?
Dude, no, I mean like when I'm in the other room.
Oh. I do not approve of a woman seeking to build herself a literary reputation, Emily.
I am a poet. And there is nothing you can do to stop me.
You can be a great poet. The book will never forget.
As you can see then, Emily Dickinson came from quite a rich aristocratic background, but did spend most of her life in seclusion, either looking after her mother or indeed writing her letters and poems. Many of her poems feature the theme of death and grief, and as Imperceptible as Grief is no exception. Some facts about Emily then. Emily Dickinson was an American poet raised in a Puritan New England household. This meant she was scared of death and hell. Her bedroom itself overlooked a cemetery where 5 of her friends were in fact buried. She wrote thousands of poems during her life in letters to friends and acquaintances, but her work was only ever published posthumously, that is, after her death in 1886. She was housebound by choice through most of her life as she cared less and less for other people who became a distraction from her work as a writer. She spent the time looking after her mother instead. Her poem then, as Imperceptibly as Grief by Emily Dickinson.
As imperceptibly as grief, the summer lapsed away, too imperceptible at last to seem like perfidy. A quietness distilled, as twilight long begun, or nature spending with herself sequestered afternoon. The dusk drew earlier in, the morning foreign shone, a courteous yet harrowing grace as guests who would be gone, and thus, without a wing or service of a keel, our summer made her light escape into the beautiful.
A very reflective poem then. One that isn't about chronological order or a sequence of events, simply a study of grief and comparing it perhaps to summer and the feelings when summer slowly disappears. Perhaps then in some ways quite similar to Keats's To Autumn. Before looking at the poem, let's go get to grips with some of the more difficult vocabulary being used. Take a look at the words on the board and make notes on your sheet. It might be a good idea to get your head around exactly what these words mean before studying the poem itself. Now then, we're going to go through the beginning, the middle, and the end of the poem with notes surrounding it. As we can see from the opening line and the title, death is foreshadowed in that title. The grief it mentions, making it sound sad or melancholic. A simile is used here, but it's in a strange order, as if the things she compares summer to are more important than the season. As imperceptibly with grief as the summer lapsed away. Comparing the summer then disappearing, lapsed means disappeared, to her grief she feels, or sadness she feels as summer departs. The dashes at the end of some of the lines there are repeated, which could represent the fragile mind of Dickinson or the speaker, as if she cannot think straight due to the sadness she feels. She is suggesting the joy of summer is a lie, as if the momentary happiness here is false and it will sneak away into the night. It could also suggest she feels betrayed by God, as if God is deserting her in her hour of need. The abstract nouns in the poem are all capitalised, as if the nouns are all connected to God or spirituality. You can see in this particular part of the poem the words summer, quietness, perfidy, and nature and twilight are all capitalised, suggesting they're more important than just the object being described. The twilight here suggests a lack of hope, as if death is coming for you. The night is coming for you as the sun goes down, hence the picture in the background of this clip. This could also link to life cycle, the idea of day turning to night and then night turning back into day again. Read this way, you might see this poem as being quite a hopeful poem. The nature at the end is personified, as if nature is Dickinson here in her isolation. She contemplates her own role in life. She is the nature spending time with herself. The middle of the poem then. The theme of sadness and death is continued here, as if it is unstoppable or uncontrollable. The dusk drew earlier in. We cannot prevent the night time from coming. It's inevitable. This middle section has the most dashes, as if time is now rapidly disappearing like sand in a sandglass, or the sun beginning to disappear right at the end of the day and disappearing over the horizon. It's as if Dickinson is panicking and rushing to finish the poem before she runs out of light. Dickinson reveals that happiness is foreign to her, as if she's no longer used to light. The morning foreign shone, as if she's almost wincing in the last rays or the early rays of the sunshine. Harrowing grace is an oxymoron. Grace suggests elegance, a positive image. Harrowing is something really distressing. Dickinson finds the passing of summer hard to cope with, as if this wonderful time is also quite painful for her. For a reclusive poet like Dickinson, visitors provided a lifeline to the world. Here she's describing a guest who's trying to leave but is too polite just to go out the front door. It's as if summer is a fleeting guest in her house that makes her feel temporarily happy before leaving again. And now the end of the poem. And this, or and thus, appears like a conclusion, as if the person speaking has calmed down and regained control of their thinking. Notice this section doesn't have any dashes, which implies then more control as the person connects their thoughts together. The theme of sadness and death is continued here, as if it is unstoppable or uncontrollable. The plural pronoun our implies the poem is now sharing the personal idea of grief with us all. It's our summer, not just Dickinson's. Beautiful offers a lighter tone than the rest of the poem, as it's uplifting and heavenly. It comes to an end with a full stop, showing the finite ending or conclusion, implying her life has now moved on, her thought process is now developing further, rather than breaking apart as it once did at the beginning of the poem. Now then, let's look at the details of the poem, the basic ingredients that would make your exam answer. Who is it about? Well, this is Dickinson studying the passing of summer from her isolation at home. What happens? Dickinson studies her reaction to sadness and the grief in her life. Why was it written? Dickinson explores the loss of happiness and implies this can happen without us realising. Now we're going to go on to 3 key quotes with ideas of what to write round the outside. As each quote appears, please pause this video and make notes in your anthology. Quote number 1 then, pause the screen now. Quote number 2. And quote number 3. Now we're reaching the end of the video. We're going to look at our key essay skills, and in this case I'm going to look closely at making a point before a quote. Many students immediately jump to the evidence before actually giving a statement before jumping to the evidence. This looks like to an examiner that you're literally just jumping from quote to quote without really linking your ideas together. The examiner wants you in your response to think of the whole poem or book or play, not just the parts you've selected or memorised. Starting with a point before a quote shows an understanding of the whole text, its characters, plot, or in a poem's case, maybe its themes. Here is an example. Into the Beautiful suggests to us that summer is set free. It is important as the quote shows happiness. The word beautiful suggests the summer has gone to a better place like heaven. The tone here is much more happy than the beginning of the poem. This makes us feel happy that maybe Dickinson will have a better life in the future. There's certainly a lot of good points about this answer. The exam board might well tick the fact that they've used a quote. They've explained why they chose that quote. They've gone on to analyse the word beautiful, where they've zoomed in on one particular word of the quote and explained why it's used. This candidate has also gone on to comment on the tone of voice being used and how that represents perhaps the happiness in the poem. We've got reader's reaction. This makes us feel happy. And then they've gone on to explain why we have that reaction. So lots of positives in this response, lots of things that would get marks in a test. But it feels a bit uncontrolled. Into the Beautiful starts with, in this answer, it starts with the quote, into the beautiful. It immediately jumps to one piece of evidence, rather than take into account the journey that the poet took in order to get to this line. Here's that response again then, and an examiner's comment next to it. The candidate is not showing awareness of the poem as a whole, instead picking out words and making basic comments that don't reflect what the poet's really trying to say. The quote is taken in isolation without developing any links to what came before. How to improve it then? Here on the right hand side is a much better version. We can clearly see a point being made before the quote. It starts by saying, by the poem's conclusion, Dickinson becomes almost light-hearted, into the beautiful, suggests to us that summer is set free as it evaporates into the air. Notice it's added a bit of explanation there of why summer might be set free. It is important as it allows us a more optimistic view, as if the happiness of summer will return. The word beautiful suggests the summer has gone on to a better place, like heaven, but this is left vague as Dickinson allows us to imagine the image of summer escaping. The sentence structure is short and simple to allow us to imagine the details and feelings behind it. This makes us feel happy that Dickinson will have a better life in the future as she dreams of following summer out of the darkness that she sees as her life. This is a much stronger response, making a point before the quote first and beginning to explain its detail in a bit more depth. Here is a bigger version then to break down how the mark could be achieved. We start with a clear reference to where in the poem the quote comes from, in this case the conclusion. We have why Dickinson might have included it. She makes us feel almost light-hearted. We have the quote, a short 3-word quote, one line of the poem, into the beautiful. We have a link to the reader, suggests to us. It has an explanation of why the quote's important or why it was chosen, why this quote perhaps best epitomises the theme of the poem. We've got the keyword beautiful there, selected from the longer quote. This is our analysis that must be there for the pass grade. We've got an explanation as to why I think what I do about this poem. Another link to the reader there. Dickinson allows us to imagine. A link there to the sentence structure of the poem, why it might be written the way it is. In this case, a short and simple statement. I have my reader's reaction, this makes us feel, and an explanation, as well as in this case a link to the context. I've mentioned the fact that she might see her life as darkness. This of course links to the fact she was isolated for most of her days. This then would be a strong graded answer, certainly a grade 5 or above. It's not perfect, but it covers all the bases in terms of the marking criteria. The analysis, the frequent links to the reader, the full explanation of points being made, and of course a point before the paragraph started that ties my whole essay response together. This would be one paragraph of a possible 3, but this is a very good example then of the ingredients it would take to pass this test. If I was now looking at comparisons for the second question in the exam where I must compare poems, I might compare it to Death of a Naturalist, as it is they are both a non-romantic view of nature, or death of positivity. I might compare it to Ozymandias, as it explores the theme of time passing, or power in this poem, in this case the power of grief. To Autumn could also be a good comparison, as they both explore the seasons and the sadness of summer leaving, and the grief that this could cause. If I was now to practice doing well in an exam, I might well write a whole essay where I compare these notes on as imperceptible as grief to any one of these poems. As you know from my other recordings then, you could easily watch the recording of each one of these poems and then work on comparing the notes between the two, either by paragraph or indeed quote by quote if you wanted to. Thank you very much for listening to this recording then of Imperceptible as Grief.